The Great New York Adventure of the Clampett Family. Come and listen to my story about a man named Jed. He was a poor mountaineer who barely kept his family fed. And then one day, while he was shooting at some food, up from the ground came a bubbling crude
Oil, that is.
black gold. Texas tea. Well, the first thing you know, old Jed is a millionaire. The kinfolk said, "Jed, move away from there." They said California is the place you ought to be. So they loaded up the truck and they moved to Beverly Hills, that is. Swimming pools. Movie stars. The Beverly Hillbillies. The journey had now taken them far from the hills and even far from the palm trees of California. The bustling energy of New York City surrounded them, a place of towering stone and endless noise. Granny was in a state of high agitation, her voice rising above the city din as she hurried the family along. "We will miss our plane to New York," she cried out, though they were already in the heart of it. Come on, come on." Ellie Mae tried to soothe her, pleading for her to stop yelling and explaining that she was doing her best. She asked if Shorty was there with the wagon, but the answer was a disappointing no. Nobody was ready but Granny. She was convinced the Clavis were buying half of New York from a confidence man, and she felt stranded in the middle of no place. Ellie Mae begged her to calm down, but Granny was not to be silenced. She had heard what Shorty said about that con man already selling Central Park, and she felt the urgent need to get there before they bought the rest of Manhattan. $85 million hung in the balance, and Granny felt she was the only one prepared to face the world, except for one small detail that Ellie Mae pointed out. Jed was still adjusting his trousers. As they prepared to navigate the city, a man known as Honest John Shaker stood with them. He was a man of grand words and even grander promises. Before they disembarked, he felt the need to explain his standing in this great metropolis. He claimed to have long been closely associated with the New York police force, asserting that they always loved to see him come to town. Jed, ever the trusting soul, asked if these were truly his friends. Honest John assured him they were chums and pals. He warned them that when they entered the terminal, several officers might converge upon him to ask questions concerning unsolved crimes, as he was considered somewhat of an expert in the field of criminology. Jed found this noble, believing that helping the police was as fine a thing as a fellow could do. Honest John thanked him and suggested they meet later at Central Park by the statue of Daniel Webster, a man he claimed was his third cousin. True to his word, the moment they stepped into the building, the police arrived. It happened just the way Mr. Shaker said it would. The New York police were so glad to see him that 3 of them rushed up, grabbed him by the arms, and nearly carried him out. Jed was impressed, figuring the captain had some tough questions that only a smart fellow like Honest John could answer. Left to find their own way, the family hailed a cab. The driver asked where they wanted to go, perhaps a hotel, but Jed simply told him to take them to the property they were buying, Central Park. They planned to farm it, raising hogs, chickens, and cattle. The driver was stunned, nearly losing his grip on the wheel, but he eventually pulled up to the statue of Daniel Webster. The fare was $8.40. Jed, seeing it was still broad daylight, was confused by the numbers, but the driver clarified the debt. Jed invited the man to stay and meet Mr. Shaker, thinking they might see the sights together, but the driver had seen enough for one day. He suggested they visit Bellevue, implying they would fit right in there. Jed thanked him kindly and gave him a tip, wishing him well. As they stood before the statue, Jethro remarked on the fame of Daniel Webster, noting that a whole book called The Dictionary had been written about him. Jed was proud, noting that Jethro's 6th-grade education was truly paying off. Meanwhile, Honest John was having a different kind of conversation with the authorities. A man named Buzz told him he had 24 hours to get out of town. His luggage would be waiting at the airport. Honest John blustered about his influence in high places, but the police were unmoved. When he reunited with Jed, he put a creative spin on the encounter. He claimed he had persuaded the police to leave the city open for 24 hours just for the Clampetts, so they could see the lights of Times Square and Broadway at night. Jed was touched by the gesture, thanking him for the trouble. They turned their attention to the park. It was everything Honest John had promised. He spoke of the lake being an angler's paradise, filled with exotic New York fish like gefilte fish and lox. Granny and the family were enchanted. They imagined building a cabin right on the bank and fishing out of the window. As they looked out, they saw people rowing on the lake and thought how neighborly the city was. Even when they witnessed a woman being chased by two men who took her pocketbook, Honest John quickly explained it away as a local game called mugging, a sort of keep away. In another part of the city, Mr. Drysdale was feeling the sting of a different deal. He had paid $50,000 for a bank that turned out to be a disappointment. Miss Hathaway tried to encourage him to think positive, suggesting he might get his money back. He decided she was right and informed her that the money would be coming out of her salary at $10 a week. To fulfill the debt, she would have to live another 100 years. She called him the most avaricious man she had ever known, and he toastily agreed. Back in the park, the business deal for the land was moving forward. Judd asked for a fair price for Central Park. Honest John, ever the opportunist, asked how much cash Jed had on him. When Jed mentioned $5,000, Honest John declared that to be the exact price, a sacrifice made for a friend. Jed counted out the bills. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He still had some walking around money left. Their tour continued to the Statue of Liberty. Jed found her perfect and thought she would look magnificent in his new park. Honest John offered the statue for the paltry sum of $2,000. Jed worried about the labor of moving such a large lady, but Honest John praised his humanitarian heart, suggesting they leave it there for everyone to enjoy. To show his own generosity, he threw in the island it stood on for free. He then offered to sell Jed the Staten Island ferry, claiming he bought it from his friend Alexander Staten. Jed was happy to buy it, seeing how many people enjoyed riding it. The Brooklyn Bridge was next on the list, a prize Honest John said he picked up at an auction. While the men talked business, Granny and Jethro were busy. They started building a fire pit in the park to cook groundhog stew and gopher gravy. Jethro had even tried his hand at the local game of mugging. He returned to the group with a collection of items: an iron pipe, a shiny chain, a leather-covered fishing sinker, and a fancy prong sticker. He explained he had won them from some fellows in the bushes, though he admitted he had accidentally bent their pipe. Jed, ever the teacher of morals, told Jethro he should not play for keeps and insisted he return the items and apologize. Jethro was reluctant, calling the men bad sports, so Jed took it upon himself to return the goods. He found the men behind the bushes and offered to pay for the bent pipe. The men were confused by the old man's kindness and strength as he straightened the iron pipe with his bare hands. They decided they didn't want any more trouble with this family of giants. As the hour grew late, the police returned for Honest John. His time had been shortened. He had only 1 hour to catch a plane. He complained of police brutality and threatened to take his case to the Supreme Court, but a single word from the officer silenced him. He bid a hasty and fond farewell to the Clampetts, heading for Chicago, where he said the heat was off. Jed and the family were sad to see him go. They truly believed he was one of the finest fellows they had ever met. He had sold them the park, the statue, the ferry, the bridge, and even the Algonquin Hotel, which Jed wanted as a nice place for Indians to stay. In a final, surprising act of conscience, or perhaps just a desire to leave without further complication, Honest John told them to keep the rest of their money. He told them to give it to the Indians at the hotel. As he was driven away by the police, the Clampetts stood in their park, surrounded by the beauty of the city they now felt they owned. They watched the people riding the ferry and looking at the statue, happy to share their good fortune with everyone. It was a day of lessons learned, of friendship found in unlikely places, and of the enduring kindness of a family that saw the best in everyone they met. The sun set over Manhattan, lighting up the thoroughfares just as Honest John had promised, leaving the Beverly Hillbillies to dream of their new life in the big city.